So the World Trade Organization says global trade is expected to plunge by as much as a third this year, this amid the coronavirus pandemic. Of course, economists believe that the decline will probably exceed that of the 2009 financial crisis. Xhanti Payi is an economist and founding director of Nascence Advisory and Research. He joins us tonight via Skype from Johannesburg to talk about all of this, Xhanti, including the announcement by the president tonight. I'm keen to hear your reading of the economic measures that government has announced to try at least cushion the blow from the pandemic.
Look, I think good evening, Tabigila. I think the one thing that was quite positive was the tone of the president, in which he really was quite reassuring. Now, and he also tried to speak to the various interventions that the government has started to gather in terms of trying to pull us through the situation. There is no doubt, as it says, that we are facing really, really difficult times. This pandemic finds us in a very weak position, economically, fiscally. We know that our budget situation is not doing very well. We've been downgraded. We know that our economy hasn't been growing, and it's a matter of sector by sector. So I thought that it was important for him to actually announce some of the interventions. One of the key things that I really think the president should speak to, and I think the government should speak to, is how actually we go into the specifics of each sector and each challenge that we face. For example, I thought one of the things that he talked about was some of these payments from the unemployment insurance fund, where he says there's 40 billion, but so little of that has been paid. And we also know that many of these companies are not applying. So where we say, how do we actually cushion people, and be very serious and methodical about how we cushion people, especially workers, from the devastating effects that we are about to face, given the extension of the lockdown.
So, Xhanti, here's the thing. We are sitting with a country that in the last quarter of last year went into a recession. All the ratings agencies have us in junk status. We're dealing with this coronavirus pandemic. Yes, you've got these measures meant to cushion the blow right in the middle of it all, UIF and all of that. But would I be right to say that the hardest work will come, in fact, post the pandemic?
No, definitely, because I think one of the key things that you have to recognize, that all economies and all economic output and all economic success is about planning. And one has to say, you look forward and you say, what can you see in the distance? Now, the problem that we are facing now is that all the decisions we're supposed to be making, all the investment we would be making today, that would actually take time to take effect, are not being done. So, for example, we know we should be spending money today that, so if we were, for example, building roads, those roads are roads that will be finished in the distance that then we use in terms of transporting goods. And if we don't build those roads today, that means actually that the future then becomes bleak. So it's all about the decisions and the actions we take today that then affect us in terms of our fortunes going into the future. I think that's the major problem that we face now, because actually this virus paralyzes us. This crisis puts us in a situation in which we cannot do today the things that will benefit us tomorrow. And so you're absolutely right. That part of the challenge you face is about tomorrow, because we are not doing those things today.
Cast our attention beyond our borders then, because the World Bank today predicting that sub-Saharan Africa's economies are to shrink by as much as 5.1% in the worst case scenario. What impact is that going to have on what has been a renewed focus among African countries to boost intercontinental trade?
That's quite essential, because one of the things that you've said about intercontinental trade, right, you can't trade what you do not produce. And if you are sitting at home and you're not producing, that actually means that therefore you cannot trade, so that intercontinental trade becomes even smaller. Now, we have some opportunities. I think the president maybe alluded largely into this, that at some point we're going to have to say, how do we actually make sure that this lockdown is done in such a way that actually allows us to do some work? So, for example, we know that the transport system is somewhat open, the informal system is somewhat open. So how could we, for example, think about the construction sector? We know that this is in open spaces. There you can actually allow, for example, for social distances between people as they build, as they do more. So there is opportunities in the economy in which we can actually open some parts of economic activity while we keep others closed. We know that we can actually, we are learning more as we go along, and the government, because of those learnings, have been able to actually open some places as we actually maybe tightened in other areas. So the point now is to say, yes, we're extending this, we're trying to protect our gains, but in some way we also have to make sure that some work is being done. We are putting some boots on the ground, because if we are to try and keep this going, we have to make sure that we are not actually pretending as if, or going on as if we have not learned any lessons and we don't know any better than we did, say, 14 days ago.
So what do African countries then do at a time when the likes of the Chinese, we know, have gone to great lengths to invest in Africa? Europe is also dealing with a lot as far as this coronavirus pandemic is concerned. Where do African countries begin to look outside of the continent if they're trying to attract foreign investment?
Look, I mean, foreign investment really relates in terms of what you've got and what you are doing. So, for example, which sectors can we still rely on foreign investment? If we think, for example, about mining, this would be open mining, for example. That might be an opportunity for us, because I guess depending on what kinds of activity that we are doing, we may be able to do that. Agriculture is another one, because I guess you could find different ways of doing agriculture, putting people out there into the field to work with that risk. We can test people, and we can quarantine people, and we can keep them at work. So there's various options that we have at our disposal to work around the working of the virus and be able to keep some economic activity. There are ways in which people obviously are already working from home. There is some manufacturing that can be done from home. I mean, I can give you an example of a friend of mine who is doing these face masks, who can have people working at home with machines to deliver on this work. So all of this stuff is possible. So what we need to be very smart about how we go on forward with the knowledge that we've already had over time, and of course trying as much as we can to protect our gains in terms of protecting the people and protecting the lives of South Africans. So I think the next step now is to say, we have gone through this. There's a lot of learnings both at home and globally. How do we keep those learnings and use them to our advantage?
Just on that global point, Africa, of course, there's growing skepticism about African countries getting funds from the likes of the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank itself facing some level of criticism. Are we expecting to see more African countries going and seeking aid from those institutions?
I think one of the things that we are learning, the historical perspectives have to change somewhat. We know, for example, that the IMF, as one funder, has been quite open in terms of a more collaborative approach. So things are changing from the perspective that we had before, where they were much more imposing, more antagonizing in terms of their programs. Now it's much more of a collaborative thing. So African countries can design their own programs, can continue to work with the IMF, and we also know that there are other sources of funding. So we have to say yes to as much sources of funding as possible, and then move towards saying, okay, now how do we use each fund to actually serve us in the best way we can? We also have now negotiating power that many of us didn't have 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So we have to use all these levers that we have. We have much more better structures. We have much more better international relations. We have much more better negotiating powers, and we've got actually expertise and knowledge. So how do we use that to the best of our ability? We can no longer say, just because we were harmed before, or we feel that we were taken advantage of, that there's nothing that changes. We now know better, then we can do better. And I think it would be less than wise to not take this advantage, to take these lower rates that are available from these international institutions, the IMF. I suppose in South Africa, for example, we've got the BRICS Bank. So there are opportunities we can take advantage of, and we must, because we have to do the best we can in this moment. Ideologies are important, but also we have to be very practical about how we protect people's lives and livelihoods to make sure that we don't fold everything today.
Xhanti Payi, economist, always great to have you on ENCA. Thank you so much for speaking to us tonight.